Hey folks, welcome to episode 12 of Tea and Type, your time to chill and make words. I am MK England, and with me as always, the wonderful Jamie.
Hi everybody, I'm Jamie Paxton, and we are so excited to talk about World Building Part 2 tonight. Yes.
Let's start off with our usual, if Jamie has anything to share today. I don't know if you're just rocking your sport tea, or if you got something
LaCroix.
fun.
I'm drinking
Hey.
This is gin. No, I'm just kidding.
Hey, you do you. Nobody's judging.
Right? It's going to be a very fun episode. This is LaCroix, so it's just sparkling water. You?
Yeah. I am just sticking with decaf today. I've got decaf mango green tea today. One of the fun things about moving is that you go through all of your random junk and find all kinds of stuff. And I keep finding all these weird little packets of tea all over the place. This is not weed, it's tea. And now I'm getting to try all kinds of weird things. So cool.
Very nice. I would also like you to share with everyone what kind of microphone you use, because she just revealed this before the show and I didn't know, and it's worth sharing. So, coming to you live from that fantastic thing, whereas I'm on my crappy headphones. So just thought that was a little bit that needed to be shared.
It's fun. I love it. It's a great tool.
It is. All right. So we're talking world building. And last week we talked to Kristen Ciccarelli, and she shared that for her, world building actually comes really late in the process, which is different for us and different from other writers. I think we referenced V. Schwab last week, who builds her world first and then puts people in it and then says, what's the story that would come? And that's definitely one way to do it. Kristen, on the other hand, just as a reminder, said, I think she started with characters, right?
Yeah.
And then her plot came along, and then eventually she's like a painting, she sketched her outline and all these things, and then she colors it in. And those details would be the world. So I guess the question for you, Megan, is where in the process does it come for you when you're world building?
It comes really, really early, and to some degree it depends on the project, but a lot of times the initial idea seed for a book will be something world related, and then I'll just extrapolate out from that until I have characters and a plot and all of that kind of stuff, which we are going to do for you live later on. So that's how it goes for me. What about you?
Much the same. It depends. I mean, it depends on what part of the idea has caught me. So sometimes I don't know. Let's see. For one of the early books I wrote, My Dystopia, everybody has one. I really wanted to write about a girl that lived in a city that was divided, much like this picture I saw of Brazil, where you have like high-rise condos on one side and you have slums and garbage dumps on the other side. And so I really wanted to write about a world that's starkly divided. So I built the world first, and then I kind of told the story. And so it's a dystopia world, so it's not exactly referential to ours.
I haven't written one of those yet. I need to do that.
If you wait 10 years when you can actually sell it, right?
Maybe. Yeah, I will say, even though I tend to start with the world building first, it is definitely an ongoing process. I am always stumbling through the world as I go, and no matter how much world building I do ahead of time, inevitably 2 or 3 chapters in, I'm going to go, oh crap, it can't be like that because of this giant plot hole or this huge logical issue that I did not realize before. And sometimes that happens 3 or 4 drafts in, 2 editors later, once it has already sold, and you're like, oh God, what did I do? So it's an ongoing process.
I think that's fair though, right? Because for me, again, no matter where you start, you're going to unveil new things as you move your character through this world. So you can plan it out extensively, but then they get to a city, and then they get to walking down a street in the middle of that city, and then they open a door, and you have no idea what's behind that door. And so that's sort of one thing I really enjoy about writing, is kind of opening those doors, if you will, because, and what's behind it has to make sense within the logic of the world, or it doesn't at all, and that's significant as well, and that's exciting, and that's a plot point. So again,
what I like about what you just said though is how you're drilling down into more and more specificity. So you're building this wider, broader world, and then you go down the street, and then you open the door, and that's where you can slide over into contemporary world building as well, where the specificity is key. If you're writing a contemporary, we live in Earth, we know what Earth is like, but we don't know what your little small town in the middle of Tennessee is like. And you have to really make us feel like we know that town and live there, and the people are people we've met before because they feel so familiar.
Yeah, I mean, to speak to that, I must plug my own Twitter account today and say that I just posted a picture of the It'll Do Motel, which was a landmark in my teeny small town in Tennessee for a very long time until it was torn down. And I put it on Facebook and Twitter, and I think this is hilarious, right? Like, it's so funny. But one of my old girlfriends who I'm still Facebook friends with, like, we were best friends in like 4th and 5th grade. And so she replied like, oh yeah, that's right. That was the road that you turned down to get to my house. And I had totally forgotten that, I'm just posting this as this like sort of ironic thing, but for her, that was a landmark to her house. And so, if I was writing a contemporary about myself in 5th grade, and every time I went to this friend's house where we had roller skating parties in the basement, you pass the It'll Do. I mean, it's just part of the landscape. And so those are the sort of textured details, I think, in contemporary that are very important and that signify something to your character. And so, yeah, I mean, that's the level that you need to get to, I think.
I think that's a good question to ask yourself when you're writing a contemporary. Like, what does your character drive past on the way home? That really tells you a lot.
What kind of shampoo does she? I mean, you know what I mean? Is she a body wash or soap kind of girl? And what does like one of my characters right now is very poor, but she uses body wash. And the question is, why? Because that stuff's expensive, right? And it's because her best friend gave her this big like gift card to Bath and Body Works. And so everything has a logic to it in a way that maybe you wouldn't develop as closely in a fantasy world, although I would argue that some of the best fantasy worlds are developed to that level.
Yeah, I think your fantasy worlds don't want to, just because you have all the cool technology and the cool magic and all of that stuff, you don't want to lose the body wash level detail there, like the crumbs on the nightstand, like what brand of soda is in the fridge.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I guess I would say one takeaway is that world building is kind of the same no matter what kind of story you're writing. A good world will hold a reader no matter what. And I think maybe just for the sake of time, we should segue from that into our recommendation on one thing we're including in the show notes is actually a PowerPoint seminar from N.K. Jemisin, one of my very favorite world builders, and who literally has, she's won the Hugo twice for her Broken Earth series. It's wonderful. If you haven't read it, please read it immediately. And actually, my husband's reading the 3rd one, and he's talking about, so what she's done is there's a mystery. And as you, the reader, learn more about the world, the character learns more about the world as well. And so then the 3rd book takes you back a long way before the story. So much of the world building that you're actually interacting with in books 1 and 2 doesn't get explained until book 3, which is brilliant, and also a storyteller well in control of her world and story. And anyways, that's one reason we recommend this PowerPoint, because N.K. Jemisin goes through in great detail on how to build a world and things to think about, and she uses this iceberg concept. And so, do you want to explain that?
Yeah. Sure. I mean, it's really a simple concept, and that's why I love it. It's a really quick thing to remember that drills home really what world building should be, the relationship that your readers have to world building versus the author has to world building. And the whole idea is we only ever see the tip of the iceberg, your reader should only get 10% of the world building that you actually do. That other 90% is just for you. Your reader is never going to know about it, but it influences the way that you write in a lot of very subtle ways, and it makes your world feel richer and more lived in, even if a lot of those details never quite make it onto the page. So we really highly recommend that you go down and learn from the master. And it's a really fascinating PowerPoint with a great exercise where you can just go through and actually build a world from like the physical world and like where the plates are and the fault lines and stuff all the way to who lives there and what is their life like. It's really fascinating. Yeah,
and she builds worlds like you were talking about on the tectonic level, and that signifies in her story, and that is an amazing, I mean, I don't think it's a spoiler to say it's sort of an earthshaker type magic is what she uses. And that's one of her more revolutionary things, like her magicians can move the earth. And so tectonics are really important. So she figured those out, and I think that that's the other thing too, in terms of world building is, even if you don't want to think on a planetary level, you consider the things that are important and that move the gears of your societies or your world or your characters at the very least. And so now let us move on to potato chips.
Okay, so where this starts is my favorite particular brand of world building, which is being like channeling that stage of toddlerhood where everything is just why? Why is it like this? Well, what happens if you do this? Well, what about this? Well, what about this? Until you want to scream. So that's what we're going to do with potato chip magic today. We have not prepared this at all. We are just going to
it for like a minute.
Yes.
Just to get ourselves sort of, yes, roughly.
And honestly, I've forgotten what we talked about already. I'm just sort of stuck on potato chip magic. So we're like, okay, this is often how my ideas come to me. And we chose this because it's something that's so ridiculous in our minds that we would never write this concept. Maybe you would. I don't know.
I don't know, man. I've been thinking about it. I kind of want to write this book now. So.
All right, never mind. Hands off. Jamie's got dibs.
All right.
So the way that I tend to do my world building for all my books is I start off with some kind of ooh shiny concept. In this case, I'd be like, man, I really want to write a book about magic that is centered around potato chips.
Actually,
from there, potatoes, but the potato chips are important.
Yes.
And then from there, I ask questions about that concept until I have a wider world, until I have a character, and until I have a plot, all of which has stemmed from that situation.
So here's what we came up with.
Potato chip magic. What are we doing?
All right, so here's what we came up with beforehand. So there's a place. So she said potato chip magic, and I said, what about a place where potatoes are very, very important? And so to eat, if you eat a certain amount of potatoes, for every 100 potatoes you eat, so you invent a rule, you gain like 5 minutes of life. So potatoes literally give life, right? But potatoes are scarce because people are scarfing them down and living longer. So in a society like that, what would be considered the ultimate luxury item, right? Potato chips.
So I have a couple of questions based on all of that. And so my question would be like, all right, so were potatoes always scarce, or were they, was there like some point in the history of this world where a potato famine began, or the scarcity began? And what was society like before the potatoes were rare? Like, was magic much more commonplace? Did the average person have access to this magic? Or was it always something that was sort of reserved for the elite who could like afford to hoard these potatoes?
Right.
I had other questions, but I lost it.
There's logistical questions too. How did the magic get in the potatoes? How is it like what's the transaction? If you were N.K. Jemisin, you'd build down to the cellular level, right? Of how that magic gives you years of your life. And you could also do a lot of really fun stuff with like satire and the foods that are like our superfoods and things like that, because potatoes clearly are not.
Yeah, but speaking of potato chips, you know, does cooking the potatoes in a different way influence their magical content, or the way the body receives that magical content? Maybe frying the potatoes like brings out more of that magic-y goodness.
It ups your magic numbers, exactly. And so then the real question is, okay, so we've got this thing. So who's going to want the potato chips? And what if someone like a Six of Crows type gang stole a bunch of potato chips? And that was the whole heist. I mean, who would these characters be? These non-potato fed characters, right? And I mean, there's all sorts of like plot and characters and stories. And with every question you asked, right, like you're building in backstory, and you're also building in the building blocks of the world, right? Especially with the magic and the questions and that. And, you know, when you said that, the first thing I thought was some mage had a garden full of potatoes and like an experiment went awry. And there, you know, now you have a middle grade book about potato chip magic, you know, and then
with a really sweet sense of humor. I like it. But I think this and most world building, when you're trying to tease the characters out of something like this, you know, for me, I immediately think, okay, who has the potatoes right now and who wants the potatoes? So who's in control and who has no power? Go with it, okay? Go with it. It's working.
I'm here for it. But no, you're absolutely right. The power of potato chips is, I mean, why does Donald Trump have a gold toilet, right? And Thomas More writes about that in Utopia, right? That would be like, I mean, why do you have a gold toilet? Because you can afford to, you know, to take a shit on a gold toilet. And that is a symbol, whereas other people scrap and save for a $300 14 karat gold ring from Walmart. I mean, like, it is all about what is scarce and what is valued. And so, yeah, I mean, people with power would have potato chips, and then who are those people, and who wants them, you know? And also, how do you transport something as fragile as potato chips and keep them safe? And
it's true. Do they need to be transported as whole potatoes, or do they need to be turned into potato chips at a certain point in the potato's life, or else they lose their potency?
Right.
Is there like some sort of ticking clock element to this plot, maybe? So if we have the people who are in control of the potato chips, which are maybe like a cast of elite magicians or something who have been controlling the potato supply for 300 years or something, then you have who wants these potato chips. Well, obviously there are a lot of people who are not in power. If it's centralized in just a few people, there are a lot of unhappy people who don't have access to their potato chips.
I'd like to jump in here and say, as
Mhm.
far-fetched as this sound, I will say one word: the spice, or two words, right? Spice, man. I mean, that's what the entire Dune series is written on, is the rarity of this one element that, bestows certain powers and people who farm the spice and I mean, you can build a world around anything,
Mhm.
and sorry.
Well, you have to drill down and sort of see how if this has existed in the world all along, if the world has always been like this, then how has that influenced the development of cultures? How has it influenced, everything from storytelling to religion to education, to the kinds of trades and other jobs that we have, and which ones are valued, versus which ones are looked down upon in society. It affects every single level of society. So changing just one little element, and changing it from, changing potatoes from a mundane, carby food to a source of magic, suddenly makes our world completely different. So even if this were set on Earth, on October 23rd, 2017, if this world had magic potatoes, shit would be different. I feel like we should just leave it there, because what better can you end on?
I mean, I want to talk about the bag of potato chips I'm gonna go eat right now.
Ooh, that sounds
And their
good.
magical powers, right? I'm just gonna end with a random story. I'm sorry for this
No,
is what I
tied up.
do. I just read a great book about hygiene and things in the 18th century. And did you know, for a very long time, you could not toilet paper. Just bear with me. Toilet paper was not something people had, right? So when people used toilet paper, they used pine cones, corn cobs, scraps, right? It depends on where you were. Scraps of paper, really anything you could find. Having toilet paper, which is one of my favorite things about modern living, or maybe not pine cones, okay, but you get, forest things. Anyways, so toilet paper and, using the restroom and having a toilet were this rather filthy thing. So people put outhouses in the back of their property, people who collected sewage it was a terrible job. And so anyways, in the 18th century, with the Victorian revolution and production of things, they started making toilet paper. But the only way you could get toilet paper, there was all of this sort of oh my God, my brain. It was seen as such a shameful thing, the entire bathroom complex, if you will, that they didn't talk about it. So what you'd have to do is they would advertise in magazines in a very coded way, and then they'd say, clip this coupon and take it to your local pharmacist. So you go to your local pharmacist with this coupon clipped from a magazine, you'd hand it over, and then they would very discreetly hand you toilet paper, like we have, not as nice, but like we have, in a bag that you could carry home, and in a nice bag, so no one would know that you were actually buying something to clean yourself while you were going to the bathroom, because nobody ever talked about going to the bathroom, right? And so it was this very this culture of secrecy around toilet paper, and people were making fortunes. Okay, the people who made the first toilet paper, as you can imagine, it was much in demand. They were making fortunes, but they couldn't talk about the source of their money, right? Because it was seen as so scandalous, shameful, filthy, whatever. But they were loaded. And so, anyways,
I love that I can always rely on you for a really, strange history lesson. It's beautiful.
But the point is, my point, if I may, is just that toilet paper is so quotidian. We would never ever think about it ever being something that, you'd have to sneak around. You wouldn't tell people you bought toilet paper. You certainly wouldn't come up with an elaborate cloak and dagger process for the buying of toilet paper. But in fact, that was part of their world. And the reasons for that elaborate process, have roots in Victorian, manners and morality and notions of their body and all of these other world things that informed this very simple act. And so could you write a story about that? I mean, it may not be the best story ever, but you could probably write a pretty interesting little story about this whole, maybe people were stealing toilet paper and giving it out in Victorian households, and it becomes this whole business. And I mean, it's ridiculous. But the point is that world building affects a world, you know, the values of a world affect even the smallest things. And I'm sorry for the long history lesson, but that is one of the funniest random things I've read lately that I was just like, no, you had to.
I mean, we may as well jump straight from potato chips to toilet paper. I mean, why not?
You know, if potato chips can run the world, I mean, you know, these are the weird things humans do,
Yep.
and the weird ways that our world sort of like gets developed around us. And now it's no big deal. But there are other things that we might buy that are sort of, I mean, you know, over the counter or cloak and dagger, right? And I don't know, what's something like that we buy now? Can we say that on the air?
I don't know. I mean, generally anything to do with sex, because that's our culture.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
right.
People
Like
sneakily buy the condoms, you know,
morning
you
after
sneakily
pills,
buy the
that.
pregnancy test even, you know.
Yeah.
It's the way our culture is.
But not the same in other places. So again, small choices and large plots being informed by the world you live in, contemporary or otherwise.
Yes.
I'll stop
World building. Wonderful. So, dear listener, if you would like to suggest wonderful topics for conversation on Tea and Type, you can let us know just down in the comments to this video. You can use hashtag AskTeaandType on Twitter, or you can write to us at ttypewrite@gmail.com. And we are going to end by recommending a thing to you this week. Jamie, have you read, watched, listened to anything interesting?
I read this book yesterday. I read it in like 2 hours. It made me cry. It made me laugh. It is smart. It is thoughtful. It is different than The Hate You Give, but it's still a super important contribution to that. And I think actually, I mean, those two books together, I would put them in any classroom, any library. Like, they are powerful and very, very important. So I would recommend Dear Martin by Nick Stone.
Yes, that is definitely next up on my TBR. And I have to plug 2 graphic novels today. I am lucky to be a YA librarian, which means I get to do all kinds of fun random things at my library, one of which is having author visits occasionally. So tomorrow, graphic novelist Laura Lee Gullidge is going to be at the library where I work, and she is the author of the Eisner-nominated Page by Page. That's page like the name, by page like a page in a book. And Will and Wit, both of which I love because they are, they do this world building. You know, they have an incredibly local sensibility. Like, if you live in the place where these graphic novels are set, you're like, I know that street corner. Like, I know exactly this place that they're talking about. I remember that storm on that day. You know, it's the specificity is incredible. So I think they're a great look into that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I like it a lot. I like both of them a lot, and I'm looking forward to hearing her speak tomorrow night. So from here, we are going to hop over to Twitter and do some focus sprints for a little while. Just join us over there for some really low pressure sprinting. Like, don't worry about your word count or anything. Just try and get something done. Over there, I am Geektastic Lib. Jamie is at Jamie Pacton, and we will be on the Tea and Type hashtag running those sprints starting at 9:30. I also keep forgetting to say this, but I have a shiny new newsletter that I wanted to tell you guys about. Because I have all kinds of disasters news that I absolutely want to tell you about, and I'm not allowed to tell you just yet, but the people who are on my newsletter list are going to be the first ones to know. So you can subscribe to that. The link is down in the notes, but it's bit.ly/MKE news, and the MKE has to be capital because Bitly is a jerk like that. Anything else?
That's it. I'm looking forward to next week. So,
all right. Well, this has been Tea and Type. Let's head over to Twitter and make some words together.
Bye, guys.
Bye.